Picture yourself 7 days from today, standing in your kitchen in the early morning light. Something feels different before you even reach for your mug. The familiar tightness in your hands, the kind that usually takes half an hour to ease up, has quietly stepped back. Your energy doesn't spike and abandon you before lunch. Your stomach feels easier, lighter after breakfast. Your knees bend without announcing themselves. And if you've been watching your blood sugar the way your doctor suggested, you'd notice something worth noticing. It's moving in the right direction. Now bring yourself back to this morning. The same slow start, the same deep stiffness waiting for you at the edge of the mattress. You made your coffee the same way you've been making it for longer than you can honestly remember. And somewhere around 2 in the afternoon, that wall appeared again. The one you've quietly started accepting as just the way things are now. A tax you pay for getting older. An inevitability you've stopped questioning. What I want to offer you today is this. The difference between those 2 mornings may come down to 3 small, dried objects that are probably sitting in a grocery store near you right now. 3 whole cloves. I understand how that sounds. I've spent more than 2 decades working at the intersection of nutritional science and clinical medicine. I've watched superfood trends rise and collapse. Goji berries, spirulina, activated charcoal, green coffee extract. Most of them are excellent marketing layered over thin science. When I tell you that this particular combination deserves serious attention, I mean it deserves attention because the underlying biochemistry earns it, not because the story is appealing. Before I take you through the method, I want to flag something I'll come back to in a few minutes. There is one habit that a large majority of people bring to their morning coffee that completely neutralizes every benefit I'm about to describe. One habit. It seems perfectly harmless. Most people have been doing it their entire adult lives. And it takes about 6 seconds to change once you know what it is. Hold that thought, because first you need to understand the mechanism, and the mechanism is genuinely worth your time. Your morning coffee, when it's good coffee brewed properly, contains a polyphenol compound called chlorogenic acid. You've probably heard the word antioxidant thrown around in coffee conversations before, but chlorogenic acid is doing something more targeted than a vague antioxidant benefit. It works across 3 distinct pathways that matter specifically to bodies over the age of 50. It reduces oxidative stress in the tissue lining your blood vessels. It improves how your cells respond to insulin. And it suppresses a class of chemical signals called pro-inflammatory cytokines. Those are the messengers responsible for what researchers call low-grade systemic inflammation. Not the acute, obvious kind that comes with an injury. The quiet, slow-burning kind that erodes comfort and energy and metabolic function over years without ever announcing itself dramatically. A study published in the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry in 2023 focused specifically on adults over 50. Participants consumed coffee consistently over 4 weeks. Researchers measured C-reactive protein, which is one of the primary blood markers for systemic inflammation. The reductions were measurable. These weren't people taking pharmaceutical compounds or high-dose supplements. They were drinking coffee, the same coffee available at any grocery store. Now let's talk about cloves. Whole-dried cloves contain a compound called eugenol. A comprehensive review published in 2022, covering 47 clinical and tissue-level studies on eugenol's effects, reached a conclusion that genuinely stopped me when I first read it. The compound's impact on prostaglandin synthesis and on the specific biochemical cascades that drive inflammation was comparable to low-dose ibuprofen in tissue models, without the gastrointestinal consequences of long-term anti-inflammatory medication use. Think about that for a moment. A compound that performs on a comparable level to ibuprofen, available at any supermarket for a few cents per serving. 2 compounds, 2 completely different mechanisms inside the body. And here is where the science becomes genuinely interesting. When chlorogenic acid and eugenol enter your bloodstream during the same metabolic window, they don't simply each do their separate jobs. They produce what researchers refer to as nutritional synergy. The combined effect is measurably greater than either compound produces on its own. Chlorogenic acid is working on your insulin response and glucose regulation. Eugenol is working on your prostaglandin production and interleukin pathways. Together, they're simultaneously addressing two of the most significant drivers of age-related decline: insulin resistance and systemic inflammation. Two major targets. 1 cup of coffee. Under 10 minutes of preparation from the very first morning you try it. Here is the full method. You'll need 3 whole dried cloves. Not clove powder. Not clove oil. Not a capsule from a supplement shelf. Whole, intact dried cloves. Measure approximately 300 milliliters of cold water into a small saucepan. Add the 3 cloves. Bring the water to a boil, then immediately reduce the heat to a low, gentle simmer. Set a timer for 5 minutes exactly. That number is not approximate. Do not simmer for 8 minutes because the smell seems stronger. Do not simmer until the color looks right. 5 minutes on a gentle simmer. After 5 minutes, remove the pan from the heat. Use that clove-infused water as the base water for your morning coffee, whichever method you normally use. Pour it through your coffee maker, your French press, your pour-over setup. Brew your coffee exactly as you always do, with that water substituted in. That is the complete protocol. The cost per serving, depending on where you shop, works out to somewhere between 3 and 8 cents. If you're working with a compressed morning and 10 minutes isn't available, there is a faster alternative. Take a single whole clove and press it firmly against a hard surface with the back of a spoon. You want to crack it open without reducing it to powder. Drop that cracked clove into your freshly brewed, already hot black coffee. Let steep for 3 minutes. Remove the clove before drinking. This approach delivers roughly 60% of the bioavailability of the main method. Not ideal for the full compounding effect, but considerably better than standard coffee on its own. On constrained mornings, this keeps the practice running without breaking the consistency that matters most. Let me walk you through what happens inside your body and when. Within 15 minutes of finishing your first cup, Eugenol reaches the smooth muscle tissue lining your arterial walls and acts as a mild natural vasodilator. The walls relax slightly. Blood moves more easily. Not dramatically, not in a way that destabilizes blood pressure, but enough to change the character of your morning energy. Many people experience a particular kind of friction with strong coffee. A slight chest tension, a mild tremor, that wired, slightly anxious alertness that never quite settles in a clean focus. This happens in part because caffeine triggers a cortisol and adrenaline response. And for most adults, that response is amplified because the natural cortisol peak runs from roughly 6 in the morning until 9. Eugenol modulates that response. It doesn't blunt your caffeine or reduce your alertness. It smooths the cortisol edge that tips some people from focused into agitated. The result is what I describe to patients as clean energy. Alert without the anxiety underneath it. Present without the edge that slides into irritability by mid-morning. One of my patients, a retired engineer in his mid-60s who had been drinking strong black coffee since his 20s, came to me describing exactly this problem. He called it coffee nerves that had gotten noticeably worse since his early 60s. He had tried cutting to a single cup. He had tried switching to a lighter roast. Neither adjustment helped because neither addressed the missing buffer. I introduced this protocol. 3 weeks later, he sat across from me and said something I've heard in different versions from several patients since then. He told me it felt like he was finally drinking his coffee correctly, and he hadn't realized anything was wrong until the something better arrived. At the 24-hour mark, Eugenol begins its work in your gut. Its antimicrobial properties are selective, which is a critical distinction. It suppresses specific pathogenic bacterial strains while leaving beneficial populations of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium largely intact. This is meaningfully different from what broad-spectrum antibiotics do, which is essentially clear everything and leave the gut in worse shape than before. Eugenol acts more like a targeted adjustment. The practical result that most people notice by the evening of the first day is reduced bloating, a sense of lightness in the abdomen, and easier digestion after meals. Nothing dramatic, just noticeably easier. By day 3, the metabolic shift begins to register. Chlorogenic acid's influence on insulin sensitivity is not an immediate effect. It builds over consistent daily exposure until it reaches a meaningful concentration in your tissue. Researchers at European University tracked participants over 72 hours of daily intake and measured the blood sugar spike that typically follows a meal. After 3 days, the post-meal spike was measurably lower. In practical terms, that 3 o'clock craving for something sweet or starchy becomes less urgent. Not gone, but quieter. Blood sugar swings generate cravings. When the swings flatten, the urgency of those signals softens. For the approximately 40% of men over 50 who carry some degree of insulin resistance, often without a formal diagnosis, this compounding effect is clinically relevant. At the 1-week mark is where something tends to surprise people most. The anti-inflammatory effect of daily eugenol accumulates until it crosses a threshold where joint tissue begins responding. Morning joint stiffness has a significant inflammatory component. The fingers that need several minutes to open fully. The knees that announce themselves when you stand from a seated position. The lower back that requires its own warm-up routine before it will commit to the morning. These sensations are substantially driven by elevated interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein, both of which eugenol directly suppresses through the arachidonic acid pathway. After 7 days of consistent intake, reductions in these markers have been documented in clinical studies. The data captures the mechanism clearly. What the data doesn't capture is how it feels on an ordinary morning when you realize you stood up from the couch without first bracing for it. I want to be honest with you. You will not feel the way you did at 35. The years are not reversible. But a meaningful portion of what we attribute to age is actually attributable to accumulated inflammation layered on top of those years. And that layer is modifiable. That modification is something your body can feel. At the 30-day mark, there is a final dimension to this protocol that most people do not anticipate. Eugenol activates specific enzyme pathways in the liver involved in what researchers call phase 2 detoxification. The liver's role, among its many jobs, includes processing and neutralizing circulating compounds, metabolic byproducts, residues from medications, environmental compounds that enter the system through food, water, and air. Liver efficiency tends to slow incrementally with age. Not fail, just slow. And that slowing has visible consequences. After consistent daily eugenol intake over a month, 2 things often become noticeable. The first is reduced morning puffiness, especially around the eyes. The second is a gradual improvement in skin clarity and tone as the liver's improved processing reduces the recirculation of compounds that otherwise show up in the complexion. A patient of mine in his late 60s, a former university professor, came in originally over blood sugar concerns. After 4 weeks on this protocol, the first thing he mentioned when he sat down had nothing to do with glucose. He told me his wife had asked whether he'd been getting more sleep. He hadn't changed his sleep habits at all. His face simply looked less fatigued. These are not dramatic physical transformations. They are real, cumulative, biochemically measurable changes produced by something that costs almost nothing. Now, this is the part one need you to pay full attention to, because here is the information I promised you at the beginning of this. There are 3 specific habits that will completely neutralize every benefit I have described across all 5 of those time windows. The first, and this closes the loop I opened at the very start, is adding milk, cream, or any sweetener. Milk proteins, specifically casein and whey, bind directly to both chlorogenic acid and eugenol in your digestive tract through a process called polyphenol protein complexation. When this binding happens, your intestinal wall cannot absorb the compounds. They are effectively deactivated and move through your system without entering the bloodstream at all. You are consuming the chemistry and receiving almost none of the effect. Sugar creates a separate but equally counterproductive problem. It triggers an insulin response that directly conflicts with the blood sugar stabilizing action of chlorogenic acid. You're simultaneously pushing glucose upward and attempting to moderate it. The 2 actions cancel each other before either can do meaningful work. For this protocol to produce results, the coffee must be black. No milk, no cream, no sweetener of any kind, including artificial ones. I understand this is a significant adjustment for many people. One of my patients told me he had been adding full-fat milk to his coffee since the mid-1970s and had no interest in changing that for any reason. I didn't argue with him. I told him to give it 2 weeks with the protocol and then decide. He returned 2 weeks later and reported that the plain version had started tasting noticeably better. The clove changes the aromatic profile of the coffee in a way most people find genuinely pleasant, almost warming. The palate adapts faster than most people expect, usually within 4 to 5 days. The second mistake is simmering the cloves for longer than 7 minutes. Eugenol is a volatile aromatic compound. Extended heat doesn't continue extracting it. It begins breaking it down. The 5-minute simmer I described is precise for a biochemical reason. Eugenol extraction approaches its documented peak concentration at the 5-minute mark. Between 5 and 7 minutes, you remain within an effective range. Beyond 7 minutes, thermal degradation accelerates. And here is the counterintuitive part. The longer the water simmers, the stronger the clove aroma becomes, because lighter volatile fractions escape first. So the water that smells most intensely of clove may actually contain less bioavailable eugenol than the water simmered for the correct duration. A stronger smell does not mean a better result. Set a timer. 5 minutes exactly. The third mistake is the most common and the most correctable. Inconsistency. Every mechanism I described works through cumulative daily exposure. Insulin sensitization builds over 72 hours. C-reactive protein reduction compounds over a week. Liver enzyme activation develops over a month. These are not acute effects that occur once and persist independently. They require daily exposure to maintain adequate tissue concentration. 3 cups per week may deliver 20% of the benefit I described. 1 cup every morning for 4 consecutive weeks delivers the full compounding effect across every timeline. Consistency is not a bonus feature of this protocol. It is the protocol. One important note for a specific group. If you're currently taking anticoagulant medication, including warfarin, clopidogrel, or regular aspirin therapy, please speak with your physician before beginning this. Eugenol has mild blood-thinning properties. In combination with existing anticoagulant treatment, that interaction needs individual evaluation by someone who knows your complete medical picture. Similarly, if you have active gastric ulcers or chronic gastritis, a brief conversation with your doctor before starting is genuinely worthwhile. For the majority of people, clove compounds are very well tolerated, but those specific conditions warrant medical awareness before proceeding. And as with everything I share here, this is educational content drawn from published research. It is not personalized medical advice. Your doctor should know what you are adding to your routine. That is not a legal formality. It reflects how nutrition science and conventional medicine produce the best outcomes when they work together rather than in parallel. So here is where everything lands. 3 whole dried cloves, 300 milliliters of cold water, a gentle simmer for exactly 5 minutes, coffee brewed through that water, black, every morning consistently. Over 1 month, what tends to develop is this: steadier morning energy without the anxious edge, improved digestive comfort, more stable blood sugar, and noticeably quieter cravings, meaningfully less joint stiffness in those first minutes of the day, and a gradual improvement in liver processing efficiency that often shows up in your face before it shows up in your lab results. Not a miracle, a mechanism, one that costs almost nothing, requires under 10 minutes, and starts working the very first morning you try correctly.